Okay, as we start this one today, I feel like I have to mention with the music, of course. This is Makuhita Dojo from Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX. This is, of course, the perfect music to use for Hariyama here because it combines my loves of making these videos and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. It also is, I think, a little bit of a throwback, maybe, to the Marowak video where I used the Marowak Dojo theme. And that's pretty topical because Hariyama and Marowak are the two Pokemon right now that are abusing Speed Pass. So, not the only two, but definitely two of the most potent. Very, very dishonest Pokemon. But we're going to try to find a more honest use for our Yokozuna of UUBL here, Hariyama. For those of you who don't know, Yokozuna, that's the highest rank that you can achieve as a sumo wrestler. Don't aspire to it, you will not get there. Easier to win Gymvitational than it is to get Yokozuna. I will say that with certainty, and then you can argue about that in the comments if you're a top player and you're somehow watching my videos. Yeah, so here's the viability rankings, and finally, we have a Pokemon who actually appears somewhere on this list. I mean, granted, I think... No, actually, Sapphire was the last video that I did, right? And there was no... He was not on here, so... But Hariyama right now is top of E rank, which is not technically OU status. As we know from, like, when I started my channel, even getting to C2 is not guaranteed OU status, as Medicham was not OU for a long time. It is now, so the cutoff is between Breloom and Smeargle for whatever reason. I don't really get that. In my opinion, if you don't think that Smeargle, Jinx, and Raikou are deserving of the OU status, then you should put them in E tier rather than D, but it is what it is. But many people are saying that Hariyama is the best UUBL Pokemon. I mean, I think that's assuming that Raikou jumps back up at some point. I think it's kind of hard to argue that Raikou is not the best UUBL, but I do want to know what Pokemon in UUBL you guys think should be an OU. Right now, I think Raikou is the only one I would put. If Speed Pass manages to survive past this week, I think it's possible we could have an argument for Smeargle and OU because it is the facilitator of this strategy. Well, not the only one. If you watch my Gen 3 Baton Pass video, I hope that was made clear to you that there are many Pokemon that can be used as a part of Baton Pass strategies. But Smeargle is definitely one of the best ones at doing it, so for my money, those are the two. I do think that there's a defensible case for Hariyama, possibly Jinx, possibly Registeel, and maybe Regice. But, like, you kind of have to stretch your definition of what you consider to be OU viable, I guess, if you're going that low. But that's fine. It's all your opinion, and I will respect your right to have that opinion, so long as you put it in my comments section. And like the video and subscribe, of course. Let's go on to a little bit of a rehashing of my old content here, because that's what I really, really love to do, even more so than make these videos and listen to Pokemon Mystery Dungeon music, is just do the same thing that I've always been doing. This is a little bit of a comparison between all the fighting types. I've granted Machamp screen time status because it has been a fun Pokemon to use when I actually tried it out. So, sorry for my Machamp hating in my early days. I was a much younger, much more naive player, and I didn't realize what Machamp could do for me. So, yeah. We're actually almost through all the Pokemon on this list. With Hariyama, Breloom's the last Pokemon here. I was trying to use Breloom. I'm not very satisfied with what I came up with, so we're gonna have to get back to the drawing board on that one. Here are the base attacks of all of these fighters. They're all sitting in the 120 to 130 range, except for Medicham, who's sitting at a 60, but we know that that's a fake 60 because of its ability. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But particularly Hariyama is sitting in good company with Blaziken. Now, I would say that arguably Hariyama's in the worst situation here, because while Blaziken is sharing its 120 base attack, it has a 110 special attack and fire stab, which is very, very consequential. It makes Blaziken a very good mixed attacker, whereas Hariyama does not really have that sort of luxury. When we get into the abilities and the modifiers, Guts is pretty nice for Hariyama if you can get it active, but it's not an ability that is very easy to activate. As opposed to saying something like Medicham, who literally just has it passive, it's just straight up just going to be doubled. So that means that Medicham in base essentially has the best attack stat. But nothing to scoff at for Hariyama in that Guts. Of course, Machamp is leading the way here, but Heracross is also not too far behind. Blaziken's ability can boost its attacking stats, sort of, kind of, mostly just for its fire-type moves. Well, sorry, entirely just for its fire-type moves. So it's more like a special attack boost when you're at low HP than physical attack, so it doesn't really count. And Breloom is, I mean, it's Breloom. As for the speed, Hariyama is actually the slowest of the fighting types here. I guess I can't say it's the slowest fighting type, but it might be the slowest that is fully evolved. I'm not entirely sure about that one. That being said, though, this doesn't really paint the best picture for Hariyama. I think most of you will probably understand, if you've ever used Hariyama before, that its main utility, in fact, is in its defensive stats. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Actually, we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about how stats are calculated. So we're getting into the weeds here, the data that you don't see just from playing the game. So how your base stats, your EVs, your IVs, and your nature translate into raw stats are somewhat unintuitive. This is the formula here. So 2 times your base stat plus the IV plus your EV investment divided by 4, rounded down, times all of that times your level, divide by 100, and then what you add as a little bit extra depends on whether we're talking about HP or your other stats. With HP, you're adding your level plus 10. With your other stats, you're adding 5. And then you get a boost from the nature if it's applicable. So the nature can either give you a 1.1 times boost or a 0.9 boost, depending on whether it's positive or negative, right? So like, take for example Adamant, that's plus attack minus special attack. That's going to be a 1.1 times modifier to your attack stat and a 0.9 times modifier to your special attack stat. So yeah, I mean, if you're not very math inclined, this video might fly over your head a little bit. Just stick with me. We're gonna get to the end here and I'm gonna give you the sort of conclusion. But I just want you to note though that HP, for all intents and purposes, is going to scale differently. It's going to be a little bit higher than all of your other stats, especially when we're talking about level 100, because instead of adding that 5 at the end, you're going to be adding 110. So yeah, your HP is just going to be higher. Now that sort of depends on what your base stat is, and we're going to talk about Pokemon with some lopsided defensive stats. So what I mean by this is that there are some Pokemon who have a much higher base HP than defense or special defense, or vice versa. So On the left, we're going to have all the Pokemon who have a base HP that is greater than or equal to twice either of the defense stats. So let's take a look at our candidates here. We have Chansey, Wailord, Hariyama, and Wigglytuff. There are maybe some baby Pokemon that I didn't look at. I don't think so, though. Regardless, we're not even going to consider a baby Pokemon. I mean, I put Wigglytuff on here, alright? That's not a Pokemon that you're ever going to see. Chansey, you're also probably not going to see, but it is kind of a funny Pokemon. Jonald apparently likes to use Chansey. Here are the stats. So Chansey's got the highest HP at 250, which is ridiculous, especially for an unevolved Pokemon. Wailord is sitting at a pretty respectable 170. That's higher than, say, Snorlax, for example. Hariyama's got 144, and Wigglytuff is at 140. As for the base defenses, Hariyama's leading the pack with 60. Wailord and Blissey are sharing a 45, and Chansey sitting there at a measly base 5 defense. That is really, really low. It's kind of made up for by the fact that the HP is astronomical. So this is not to say that Chansey's gonna die to like a tackle from Rattata, but it does mean that it is going to be taking a lot of damage on the defensive side, or the physical defensive side, I should say. As for the special defensive side, Chansey has got a really respectable 105, especially paired with that 250 HP. The only Pokemon that is better at taking special hits than Chansey is Blissey, so, I mean, that's not bad at all. If you need a second special wall and you don't mind doubling up on that normal special, I guess you could run Chansey in addition to your Blissey. I wouldn't recommend that, though. Wailord has a not so respectable 45 special defense. I mean, its physical defense was not that respectable either, so I don't really think that there's anything that pressing to say. I guess it is a little worse to have low special defense on a water type because you're weak to only special attacking types like grass and electric. But I mean, I don't know. It's not the absolute worst. You could be Dugtrio with 50 HP and 35 defense. Hariyama's got a base 60 special defense, so not too terrible, not great though. And then Wigglytuff is sitting at a pretty solid 50 special defense, which is probably good for NU or whatever tier it's ranked in right now. I'm not sure. Probably not even that high. Does it get Wish this generation? I'm not sure. Now, for Pokemon that have a defense, or both of its defense stats higher than 2 times its HP, there's only one Pokemon, it's Shuckle. We're not going to talk too much about Shuckle because Shuckle is a terrible Pokemon. It's definitely better when it gets hazards, so next generation, maybe you can use Shuckle. Probably not, there are a lot better Stealth Rockers than Shuckle. But Gen 6 with Sticky Web, it's actually not that bad. So, there you go. I didn't choose to include Pokemon that have, say, like, a really high HP stat and a really low Spadef stat, but, like, also a good defense stat. So something like Rhydon, for example. Rhydon's HP and defense are pretty good. Its special defense is really bad. Reason being is that I think it's really easy to come to the conclusion of what to do with those Pokemon. In most cases, the answer is just ignore its lower defense stat. Just say, this is not taking a special hit, and focus on what you can do with that Pokemon. I'm also not looking at Pokemon who have really, really high HP and really, really low in one of their defense stats for the same reason. Just ignore what they can't do. So Blissey, for example, that's not to say that Blissey can't take a good defensive or physical attack on its physical defense, but I mean, Blissey's kind of an outlier situation. we're gonna continue on, and we're gonna use Hariyama kind of as our frame of reference throughout this. So how should we invest into Pokemon that have these lopsided defenses? First, we're gonna take a look at the damage formula. Alright, get a good look at this. There's a lot going on here. And I'm gonna tell you this. We're gonna simplify this because this is just too confusing to work with, alright? We like burn screens, multiple targets, whether we get double damage from a secondary effect of the move, whether we have charge going, like, no, stop with this, alright? We're gonna simplify this down, so I used my handy LaTeX, or LaTeX. I've always said LaTeX. You can say LaTeX. Do not say latex. You're banned if you say that. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you clearly have not taken enough physics or math classes in your college career. I digress. So, I've simplified this down. I mostly got rid of all these coefficients like burn, screens, target, whatever. Like, for the most part, we're not dealing with these. Stab, maybe we'll deal with. Type 1, Type 2, that's modifiers due to the opponent's type. I think that is something that could easily be considered here, but we're just going to assume that you kind of understand how the type chart works, and that if you're super effective, you're doing ×2 damage. If you're not very effective, you're doing 1/2 damage, and both types play into that. So, yeah, and then random is like the damage roll. So it'll roll a number basically between 85 and 100. You can scale that however you want. Whether you want to consider it like 0.85 to 1 or... Yeah, never mind, let's not get too deep in the weeds here. Just know that this is the variable that, or parameter or whatever you want to call it, that determines the damage roll. So this simplified version that we're going to be working with, B is the base power of the move that's being used against you. A is the attack or special attack of the opposing Pokemon. And D is the defense or special defense stat of that Pokemon. Now, we could even simplify this further, assuming we know the level of the Pokemon. And for most cases, you're going to be facing level 100 Pokemon. So 2 times 100, 200 divided by 5 is 40, plus 2 is 42, divide by 50 is, I think, 0.8. So you could kind of just consider that as like a 0.8. And then the base power of the move and the attack that is being thrown at you is not something that we can control as the defensive Pokemon. So we're going to simplify this even further on the next slide, but let's just notice some things here. So if we increase our defense stat, that will decrease the damage that is dealt to us, which, like, duh, that's exactly what you would think would happen. But this math kind of shows it here, because that D for defense is dividing. It's inversely proportional to the damage. But I think one thing that you'll notice here is that HP is not considered in this sort of calculation for damage. So how does that factor in? Why would we invest in HP at all if all we care about is reducing damage? Well, that's a great question. We're going to move on to this. So I've simplified our simplified formula even further. I wanted to at least show this intermediate step for those of you who are interested in trying your hand at calculating actual damage yourself, and figuring out how that works. But we're gonna really just simplify this down to some attack is coming in at your Pokemon. You can't really control what that attack is. You don't control whether it has stab. You don't really control the damage roll. We're just gonna ignore all of that. But you can control your defense. And +2 is just gonna be there. Like, we can't do anything about that. So there you go. That's like your really simplified damage formula right there. if we want to figure out how HP is involved, we're going to use this next formula here. So take that damage that you calculated and divide your Pokemon's HP stat, and then multiply by 100%. That will tell you the percentage damage that is being dealt to your Pokemon. So, for example, you know, you have 400 HP. Your opponent has an attack that is going to deal 200 damage. After factoring in all their stuff and your defensive stats, it's dealing 200 damage. So, damage is going to be 200. Divide by 400. That's 1/2 or 0.5. Multiply by 100%. That means you're taking 50% damage. That should make some sense, I hope. If that does not make sense to you, you're gonna have to see me after class. I don't really know what to say. But if anything is confusing, just leave a comment. I'll try to explain. So increasing your HP does not technically reduce the damage that you take, but it does reduce the percentage damage that is dealt to you, right? So, you know, if, like, all things said and done, that opponent is going to do 200 damage, increasing your HP is not going to cut into that. It's just going to make you more likely to survive 200 damage points. So let's use like a more concrete example. So let's say Tyranitar is going to deal 180 damage to our 0 defense EV Milotic with a max roll. I think this is Tyranitar using Rock Slide, for example. It doesn't really matter too much, the particulars. We're just looking at this damage is being dealt to the Milotic. If Milotic had 0 HP EVs, this would deal 54% of Milotic's health. But if Milotic had 252 HP EVs, it doesn't reduce the damage at all, but because you have a greater pool of health, you only take 45.6%. And that's the difference between a 2-hit and a 3-hit KO. You could say, well, leftovers could be involved. Well, not really, because Tyranitar is setting the sand. You could say that a roll could be involved, and that's true. But as this stands, Milotic is guaranteed to survive the next Rock Slide, if that's the max roll, if it has 252 HP EVs, whereas it's pretty likely to die to the next one if it had 0 HP EVs. Now, this is a little bit of an absurd scenario, because why are you running a no defense Milotic and even considering running no HP investment? Although I guess it does have a really nice special attack stat and like decent speed, so you could maybe try to make it an offensive water like that, but I don't even think that Milotic's offensive water types of sets run that kind of investment. I think they still have HP or defense, at least, so I digress. I just hope that this elucidates why HP is still an important part of the formula here, even if it isn't literally used in the damage calculation. So, should we be investing more in our HP or our defense to reduce damage? Well, granted, damage, HP doesn't matter, right? But, like, the percentage damage that is dealt to our Pokemon. And the answer is, basically, you want to pump the lower stat if you want to be the most efficient about reducing damage as possible. Now, this is technically not exactly true. That +2, like, does make a little bit of a strange trend in the graph. But that really only matters for really low amounts of damage. Like, if you're taking single-digit percentage. So we're not really dealing with that. We're going to assume that you're taking a hefty chunk of damage here, and we're going to try to figure out what we should do. So I want to make a note here, though, because this is something that confuses a lot of people. When I say pump the lower stat, I really mean pump the lower raw stat. So let's take Golem for an example, because this is a Pokemon that I've just done a video on not too long ago. You should check it out. Golem has a base 80 HP and a base 30 defense. What that means is that uninvested, meaning no EVs, no nature, but 31 IVs, of course, because why are we going to lower our IVs for no reason? Golem has a 301 HP and a 296 defense. So defense, despite there being such a large discrepancy in the base, is the lower stat. So if you want Golem to take the least amount of damage from a physical attack as possible, you should give it all defense. Now, that's not always the goal of building a Pokemon or optimizing a set. Sometimes you want to reach some special defensive benchmarks where every point that you put into defense is a point that you're not putting into reaching those special defense benchmarks. So that's one thing to consider. There's also the sort of fact that because these are so close, it's really not that major a difference. If you did just put it all into HP, then you're not going to be that much worse off than if you put it all into defense. So, but technically speaking, you would pump the defense on Golem. Now, if Golem had an even lower base HP, say if it was like base 60 HP, then the opposite would be true. You would actually want to boost your HP stat. And for the rare cases where you have Pokemon that have HP stats that are so much lower than their defense, take something like Regirock, for example, and you want them to take physical hits better, you actually just put it all on HP, and that's a really, really easy case to handle there, because you would also want that to help with your special defense. So that's all fine and dandy there. Now we're going to talk about Hariyama specifically, and because it's got such lopsided HP versus its defenses, the difference is going to be pretty massive here. Well, I shouldn't say like really, really massive, but let's take a look at some damage rolls against a Salamence. So on the left, we have the Adamant Salamence Hidden Power Flying into our 252 HP, no defense Hariyama. That is going to deal about 80 to 93%, or 94% even. So that's a lot. That is guaranteed to kill you if 3 layers of spikes are up. Versus if we instead put all of those points into defense and none of them into HP, it's only doing 65 to about 77%, which means that we have a chance to survive with 3 layers of spikes up. So that's not that bad. And like the same amount of EVs are being invested either way. So if your goal, for example, is to take the least amount of damage from Salamence Hidden Power Flying, you should put as much as possible into defense before you start investing in your HP. So there you go. And that's going to motivate the reason why I chose the EVs for my particular Hariyama, as well as why the Smogon sets choose the EVs they do for Hariyama. But before we get into that, I want to have a little bit of a reminder about knockoff in ADV. We've seen this slide a few times, I think, or at least once in the Armaldo video. The thing is about knockoff, it's a really weak move, or at least damage-wise, but it is great utility because it stops your opponent from being able to get leftovers healing. It can also be helpful in the case of, say, a Lumberry Pokemon that you're trying to paralyze, or a Choice Banded Pokemon that you don't want sweeping through your whole team, or punching holes through your walls and things like that. So knockoff is a great move. It's not very well distributed. There are only a handful of Pokemon that get it. Hariyama is one of them. Hariyama is often considered the best of them. Some people would argue Armaldo. I think that's a reasonable case to make. Some people might argue Sableye because it has a lot of roll compression because of its interesting and unique defensive type. That's great. If you argue Alakazam, I don't take you seriously, and if you argue Banette, I'm gonna ask you to leave. So, but these are your knockoff users. You can try knockoff on all of them. I I would not recommend it on Bennett. I wouldn't even really recommend it on Alakazam. These three in the middle, though, I think make great use of it. And Hariyama's sort of defensive profile here makes it really good at taking hits and then getting the knockoff off in turn. So, now let's go on to the Smogon sets. The first one you're going to see is the knockoff Hariyama set. So, this one's pretty self-explanatory. You have knockoff, your stab cross chop, your coverage hidden power ghost, and your coverage rock slide. Not necessarily in that order. But you have some kind of interesting EVs here where you have 192 defense, 192 speed def. Splitting them evenly like this, I don't think is required. But I do sort of see the idea in that if you want Hariyama to be a good mixed wall, and because its HP stat is so much higher than its defenses, you're actually better off investing a lot into both defenses than you are into the HP. But this set is designed such that you're taking advantage of investing into the defenses to raise the bulk. The adamant nature will let the attack investment make cross chop a really threatening move into certain enemies. For example, Tyranitar is cooked. Like Tyranitar's not living that cross chop. Blissey, we'll see that in a moment. We have 28 speed EVs to allow Hariyama to outrun Swampert. That is assuming that it is a minus speed nature Swampert with no significant EV investment. I think we're also outspeeding a minus speed nature Tyranitar if it has no EVs. So it's kind of interesting. A defense or special defense boosting nature can be used to make Hariyama even bulkier if you so choose. So the relevant sort of attack benchmarks here is that Rock Slide is going to 2-hit KO offensive Zapdos even outside of Sand and through its leftovers. So that's pretty good. And then Cross Chop has a 50% chance to one-shot Modest Blissey. As for Bold Blissey, you have, I think it's closer to 12%. But that's pretty good. I mean, a 1/2 chance to one-shot Blissey. There are not very many Pokemon that get the opportunity to even try that. So this is really, really good to know. Actually, I might have lied. Bold Blissey might just tank that. Probably does. Considering that Bold Blissey will just tank a max attack. Well, no, it doesn't tank a max attack Machamp, but it just barely is guaranteed to die to it, so might have a small chance. I'm not sure. Regardless, this is the sort of bog standard Hariyama idea. I think that there are some sort of small issues with this. Well, for one, Cross Chop is not a super reliable move. It's only 80% accurate. It does have a lot of attack power, and as the Smogon write-ups like to make note of, it's got that increased critical hit ratio. So they're like, oh yeah, if you crit a Salamence, or oh yeah, if you crit a Metagross or something like that, and it's that's great. What if I miss though? What if I miss the Tyranitar that Dragon Dances in my face? I mean, that would be crazy for Tyranitar to do that, but there's that side of the coin as well. There are some other things you can do with Hariyama though. So here's the special tank set. I don't know if there's a particular reason why you need Hariyama to be max special defense rather than max physical defense, but you can certainly play around with this. I think that the idea with this Hariyama is that you're going to punish some Calm Mind sweepers for trying to get the sweep on you. You can get a knockoff on them and stop their leftovers recovery and then whirlwind them out. Although I should note that on this particular set, knockoff is not seen. You actually favor Rest, Sleep Talk as your other two moves. That's a little bit interesting. Let's see what they have to say. Thick Fat and Guts both work on this set. Guts is the primary choice as it is activated by Sleep Talk, but as Hariyama has only one attack, in this case it's Cross Chop, it's not as important. On the other hand, Thick Fat will help Hariyama overcome its lower special defense stat against particularly fire-type attackers like Charizard Moltres, as well as Ice-type coverage if you're switching into that from, say, like a Suicune or a Starmie. Some HP and defense EVs can be swapped for additional attack, but even without this investment, Hariyama should Oko Tyranitar, which I think is true, yeah. And will 2-hit KO Blissey, Snorlax, and Regice. And it requires a ton of investment to achieve the Oko on any of those 3 aforementioned Pokemon. Furthermore, keep in mind that Cross Chop's critical hit ratio, or heightened critical hit ratio, means that even +6 Cursed Snorlax is not particularly safe against the Hariyama. So that's good to know. If you get a crit on +6 Cursed Snorlax, you will just straight up kill it. So that is something if you're really, really desperate, if you're against that last mon Cursed Snorlax. Though, all this being said, I do think that Sleep Talk is a little bit ambitious with this Hariyama. What I would recommend that you do instead is run Knockoff or Rock Slide. Knockoff is going to be better in the general case, and Rock Slide is going to be nice for, say, if you need to hit like a Zapdos or something still with your Hariyama. This Hariyama is not quite as good at beating Zapdos because you don't have any attack investment, but you do have a lot more Spadef investment, so you should be able to take Thunderbolts pretty easily. So that's something worth noting. You could also tweak these EVs to get yourself a little bit more attack investment. I think a good benchmark to hit would be to 3-hit KO Rest Zapdos, or like 252 HP, so that Hariyama can't get Rest Looped out of existence, basically. Good to know. There are 2 other sets here. I would consider these to be less used options. You could run Choice Band with, Cross Chop, Rock Slide, HP Ghost. Last move, you can kind of do whatever you want. Fake Out is an option. Sleep Talk is another option. Focus Punch could be an option as well, if you want to try that. I don't think that this is particularly Hariyama's best role. I have a picture of Machamp there because I think Machamp kind of just accomplishes this better because it has higher attack stat. It also has higher speed, so it can sort of get into the Tyranitar benchmarks without needing to go super duper crazy and run like a plus speed nature, for example. You're not going to outspeed the max speed Tyranitars, mind you, with Machamp, but you're going to outspeed some of the mid-range ones, like, for example, bulky Dragon Dance. So, yeah, that's one thing worth noting. And then there's a Focus Punch set, which is using Focus Punch, Counter, or Revenge, Rock Slide, and Hidden Power Ghost. I have a picture of Regirock here because I feel like this is kind of what Regirock does. Now, I don't think that it runs Hidden Power Ghost usually. I think it prefers to run Thunder Wave as that last move, but I would argue that Thunder Wave is probably better than Ghost coverage on a Pokemon that is not particularly great at hitting Gengar anyway, or wanting to stay in on Gengar. Although I should say that Hariyama, because it has Guts, is going to be a little bit more sturdy into Gengar. Gengar cannot go for Will-O-Wisp to cripple your Hariyama, so that's really nice. But yeah, I'm not saying that you shouldn't use these options ever. There are some benefits to it, like Hariyama has better defensive capabilities than Machamp, especially when you invest into the defensive stats, which is what you see in the Choice Band set. Not necessarily true in the comparison to Regirock, but You might want to have a stab focus punch for whatever reason, so that's one thing. You're going to have a lot more damage than Regirock with that. You do also get access to Revenge, which is an interesting move. It's 60 base power, so you think it's not very good, but if you act after the opponent does, or I think it's if you take damage from their attack before you get to move on that turn, Revenge doubles in base power. So that's actually really strong. Then it's a 120 base power fighting type move in a lot of cases. And Hariyama is going to be able to get it off in a lot of cases because it's got a pretty low speed. I don't know why there's an amount of speed here, like to outspeed Swampert with this particular set. I would think like if your strongest move to hit Swampert is Revenge, but like faster Revenge, like then I don't really get it. Focus Punch, it doesn't matter what your speed is, you're always going to be moving afterwards anyway. It's not like you're clicking Rock Slide or HP Ghost into the Swampert, so I maybe would tinker around with the idea of running a slower Hariyama if you're going to try Revenge. But I don't know, maybe there's some reason why. We're moving on. I'm sorry for that yawn there. This Snorlax must be attacking me in my room. But this is kind of a more consistent approach to your knockoff set. We're going to sacrifice a little bit of attack investment, and we're going to sacrifice a lot of attack output with our stab in Cross Chop by going with Brick Break. The reason why Brick Break is, well, it doesn't miss, so that's kind of it. That's all you really need. 75 base power, not super duper great, but with the stab and the adamant nature, and Hariyama's pretty respectable 120 base attack, I think you are not missing out on too much. We're gonna OHKO a 252 HP Tyranitar. We will also 2-hit KO pretty much every other fighting weak Pokemon. The exceptions would be Regirock and Registeel, who have ridiculous defense stats, so discounting those, though, we're basically getting a 2-shot on every fighting week in the game. Rock Slide is going to be used here to have a 94.1% chance to 2-hit KO offensive Zapdos, which is guaranteed if Sand is up. Or guaranteed if Zapdos does not have leftovers, but Zapdos is pretty much always running leftovers, so I don't see how that would come up. I did tinker around with the idea of running Hidden Power Rock instead of Rock Slide to have even more consistency. There are kind of two issues with Hidden Power Rock, though. One of them is that with this attack investment, you are not super duper likely to get the 2-hit KO on offensive Zapdos, especially if there's no Sand up. And as you'll see with this team, I'm not running Tyranitar, so there's no guarantee that Sand is going to be up. I would be relying on my opponent to set the Sand, which is not ideal. The other issue is the IVs that Hidden Power Rock reduces. In order to accommodate for the sort of defensive benchmarks that I'm hitting, I'd either have to cut into my speed or my attack, which is not ideal. Now, I could also just accept that I'll have slightly less defense or special defense than what I'm trying to go for here, which I think is not too terrible, but it is a consideration. With this defensive investment, we're going to survive an Adamant +2 double edge from Tyranitar, Salamence, and Metagross, including the Sand damage. We will survive a Banded Meteor Mash and an unboosted Hidden Power Flying from Salamence after one layer of spikes. This is important to note because you might be in a situation where your last-ditch effort to beat these mons is to counter. Now, if you're having to click counter against an unboosted Salamence going for Hidden Power Flying, you're probably going to lose the game because Salamence could just Dragon Dance, and that would be devastating. But say your opponent doesn't realize that they don't kill with an unboosted hidden power flying, or say you were against a choice band Salamence and you managed to knock it off on the switch in, then this might come into play. We're going to live 2 Thunderbolts from Timid Zapdos in Sand. I don't think that it's like ultra relevant to hit that benchmark because we're going to be leading this Hariyama. And lead Zapdos is obviously not going to be able to set Sand, so kind of a matter of not really needing that. Our leftovers should get us through, but you might find yourself in a situation where you had to switch your Hariyama out on turn 1, depending, like maybe they had a crazy lead like Gengar or something like that, and you find yourself later in the game against an offensive Zapdos, so that could be a consideration. We're also going to live 2 +1 Surfs from defensive Suicune in the Sand. We'll live plenty of other special attacking moves, but those are some of the ones that I thought were relevant. It's good to know that living the 2 +1 Surfs, that means that you can get your knockoff off and then go for a Brick Break or something afterwards. So that is great to know. We're going to outspeed Blissey, usually. Sometimes Blissey's running some more speed, and I kind of like a little bit of speed on a utility Blissey, but a lot of times people are not running that. They're running max special attack, which is perfectly reasonable. It's nice to get that one-shot kill on Salamence with Ice Beam. So, yeah. The other things are minus speed, nature, Swampert, and Tyranitar. We are generally going to outspeed. Those things are usually slower than Blissey, not always. Sometimes they're going to run a little bit of speed EVs anyway. But in any case, we're going to assume that we're going to be fine into anything that is a minus speed nature, base 60-ish Pokemon. So let's get into what this team is. So this is a team, I basically stole it from Nexhawk. I didn't steal it like bar for bar per se. I did change some of the EVs. I might have changed a move here and there, but I did get these 6 from Nexhawk. So shout outs to Nexhawk. Unban Nexhawk from Smogon. Actually, maybe don't. I don't really care. I don't think Nexhawk really cares either. But this is Hariyama Spikes. So lead Hariyama is going to try to knock off an important item or trade with some common leads early in the game, while the rest of your team is going to stay just solid into whatever it is. If you can kind of play like, say you knock off an item and then trade the Hariyama away for something else, you're playing 5v5 and then one of their Pokemon doesn't have an item, then you're at an advantage. Now, that's not exactly what I'm saying you should do in the lead slot or in the early game with the team. There are plenty of cases where Hariyama can be useful in a mid to end game scenario. For example, one of the best Pokemon you can try to knock off is Skarmory. That is a Pokemon that is really, really annoying to kill, especially when it's getting that leftovers healing. And being able to knock it off means now you can go into something like a Claydol and just spam spin forever while the Skarmory is slowly dying. Now, it's not so great because Claydol doesn't want to take a Toxic. It's also not super duper great at taking Vulpix forever. And it doesn't have another move to really hit the Skarmory, so Fortress is a more common Pokemon that you would see that strategy attempted with. And I do recommend that you try that out with Fortress. In fact, you could even put Fortress on this team, and then you can switch out the Skarmory and the Claydol for some other Pokemon if you would like. That would be what Benji would call a bulky mixed wish team. But we're not gonna delve too deeply into that. I do think Hariyama is fantastic on that archetype, though. If you want to try to find some more information on that. I don't know if there's a lot of information on that particular file. Maybe a video for another time, though. We have Aromatherapy, Blissey, Wish Mixed Ments, and Wish Vaporeon, which are going to provide some cleric support. All the more reason to not just throw the Hariyama away in the lead. You can trade some damage and then maybe wish it back up and then get more use out of it. The combination of utility Blissey, defensive Vaporeon will handle pretty much every water type. There are some exceptions, like offensive Swampert can be a little bit difficult to deal with. Especially like a Endeavor or a Curse Swampert, but not the end of the world. Those are definitely sets that can be played around. Pretty much every water type, though, especially Suicune, is going to be dealt with. And that's part of the reason why you would want to use a Water Absorb user. I neglected to mention in my Quagsire video, because I didn't know quite as much back then, that Water Absorb plus Blissey is a really, really solid response to Suicune. The issue with particularly Blissey into Suicune is that if you're not Calm Mind, it's really difficult for Blissey to match the sort of damage output that a +6 Suicune can do. That being, like, basically, like, Suicune is threatening to get a kill on Blissey if it gets a crit, or it's gonna force it to run out of soft boiled eventually. And Blissey can't really do anything back to the Suicune. So that's where you would use something like Quagsire more commonly. Still not fantastic into the Ice Beam Rest variant of Suicune, but not ultimately the worst case scenario. Vaporeon is going to be a lot better into those, though, because Ice Beam is resisted, and you're going to be taking, honestly, not even that much from a +6 Ice Beam. We'll probably see what happens with that in some of these replays, or hopefully we will. If we won't, then I promise we'll have a Vaporeon episode at some point, and we'll get to see what it can do in that episode. But we're not here to talk about Vaporeon too much. We're here more so to talk about Hariyama, and yeah. And I hope I don't really have to explain Skarmory or Claydol to you, like what those Pokemon do. You should know by this point. And if you don't, play more ADV games and watch more of my videos. So, yeah, we're moving on. Get into this scene here. A little bit of an awkward transition, and we're gonna play the music. That is a lot louder than I thought it was gonna be. So this is Victory Road from Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I have not played either of the games. I didn't really find much of a need to do it because I owned Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald at the time that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire came out. Actually, I gave my copy of Ruby to a friend of mine in middle school, which I don't regret doing. Although I do recognize I could have made a lot of money instead trying to sell it nowadays, but no. He was a good guy, even though I didn't ever talk to him again after middle school because we went to different high schools. He was cool. So, Robert, if you're watching this somehow, I remember you, and you were a cool guy, and we should be friends again. But enough of that. We're here to watch some games, and we're up against Mom's Dump Truck. If you are a avid ladder player, you probably know what Mom's Dump Truck team is. Mom's Dump Truck is kind of like the Fear X Ninetales of upper mid to high ladder, using the same one team, or similar to like Starless Knights. It's a Articuno Superman team. I did manage to get a game against Mom's Dump Truck with my Articuno team. I don't recall if I put that in the video though, because it was probably a really long game. I did win it though. We're up against Tyranitar with my Hariyama, and the Tyranitar goes for Fire Blast as I just Brick Break and kill the Tyranitar. Crit did not matter unless that was like a weird physical defense Tyranitar. But no, I super doubt it. The Fire Blast was not really of consequence. I kind of go back and forth, and in fact, I'm not sure what I said in, or what I'm going to put in the description, but this Guts really could just be thick fat as well. So I'm going to add that there. And I don't recall what I was in this game. I might have been thick fat, in which case that miss from the Fire Blast is kind of not that consequential. And in fact, if I was Guts, it also was not that consequential. I would have tanked that pretty easily. Now in comes the Skarmory, and I'm at 100%. It's essentially turn 1 against a Skarm, so I'm going to knock off. And that is great momentum for me. Like, if Hariyama does this for you every game, you should win. Every game. A lot of people do like to stay in with that Tyranitar against the Hariyama, though, because they're afraid to get knocked off on a different Pokemon. Because a lot of Pokemon, or a lot of Hariyama users, will go for that turn 1 knockoff regardless of what is in front of them, even if it's Tyranitar. I'm not a big fan of doing that, because there are so many people who will leave that Tyranitar in, and you don't know exactly what they're going to. It's probably going to be something that can handle Hariyama whether it has its item or not. So, like, how much value you get out of that knockoff can vary when you don't know what's switching in. But that being said, knockoff into the Void is one of the freest clicks in ADV. Like, there's not that bad an option to knock off an item from. So I wouldn't think about it too hard. So this pair of defensive Rachi and Skarmory is being really, really annoying. It's hard to manage to beat down these Pokemon, but I can get a freeze on the Skarmory, which is going to help me out a lot. It's going to force the Articuno to come in as I go for a Seismic Toss. Articuno is going to heal Bell, most likely, but that's fine by me. I can go into Hariyama, and I'm threatening a big fat Rock Slide into this ×4 weak Pokemon. And even if I don't Rock Slide, I could just go for a nice knockoff. I don't know why I didn't go for knockoff there. I just went for Brick Break. I do go for a knockoff there. I'm getting gamed on, frankly. Should have just went for a knockoff. Even if the Skarmory comes in, whatever. They go for Toxic, as I go for Brick Break. As we see, I do not do more damage with the Toxic, so I am thick fat Hariyama in this particular replay. I was switching back and forth, so yeah, but just know that there are decent arguments for either one. I don't know if one of them is necessarily better on this team. This is one of the few Pokemon in ADV that actually has 2 good and usable abilities, so that's kind of interesting. I get paralyzed on Blissey here, as I'm probably just going to Aromatherapy. The Flygon is going to come in, and we're going to see if it scouts my Ice Beam. It does. Maybe I should have been a little bit more cloistered with my Ice Beam and tried to get it later in the game, but I mean, sometimes you look a gift horse in the mouth and you don't like what you see, so sometimes you just try to click what's in front of you and see what happens. So I'm just going for Seismic Tosses, trying to force this Jirachi to run out of wishes at some point. Keep it low. It is knocked off with its leftovers, so it's not getting any passive healing anymore. I'm going to switch my Blissey now to Salamence as this Flygon is in, and Mixed Ments should be able to threaten some pretty solid damage onto the Flygon. Instead, we get a switch to the special defensive wall that is Articuno. I do not have a Mixed Ment with Rock Slide. If I did, that would have been really, really nice for me there. That just would have won the game, frankly. But I don't, so I'm going to have to go to Vaporeon, who's going to Wish and threaten to pass that to whatever I want. I'm actually going to stay in, though, because I have a really fat Vaporeon with some special defense investment. And I know that this is a defensive Gar, so it's not going to be able to do that much to me. I go for Protect there. I guess scouting to see if the Gengar would do anything. And if my opponent switches to, say, Flygon, I would rather stay in with my Vaporeon than just simply switch. I am going to go to Hariyama, who's going to get the Wish. Very nice. And let's see if I go for a knockoff on this turn. I do not. I go for a Rock Slide into Jirachi. So, that's fine. It probably would have caught the Skarmory as well. I think the idea here is that I want to limit the Skarmory coming in as much as possible. On that turn, honestly, I think a switch to Skarm would have been pretty nice for my opponent there. They should live the Psychic unless I get a critical hit. And then if I spin, it's like whatever. Skarmory can kind of just get the spikes back up. But instead they go to Gengar. I call it out with a Psychic, and Gengar is dead. That does mean that Skarmory gets the Wish healing, but I think that's fine because now there's no spin blocker. And I mean, this was already going to be in the video based on what Hariyama did on turns 1 and 2. But read this in the chat here on turn 40. Mom's Dump Truck says, "No, I will not end up in a Tetrafolium video about Hariyama." Oh my god. I mean, that cemented, right, that I had to make a video on Hariyama. I was already gonna, but like that pushed it forward. That was like, get this out immediately. So, Mom's Dump Truck, if you're watching this, shout outs to you. I really love your Articuno team. I think, I'm not gonna say that my Articuno team is better or anything. I've only played it but so much. You've played your Articuno team probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of games, and I'd kind of be curious to see what the pace is like. I can kind of guess based on when we've played. I'm pretty sure that you have like a Pursuit Tyranitar. This is defensive Rachi, standard Skarm. Yeah. And defensive Flygon, defensive Gengar. Very defensive team here. They're going to leave the Flygon in on my Dragon Claw, which is brutal. I think probably had to switch to Articuno there, but it's not great because Articuno's ceding a lot of momentum. But it would help you to not lose a Pokemon, per se. My opponent is going to just say GG there. Flamethrower is doing a lot of damage. I believe in Articuno's ability to survive 2 Flamethrowers. Now, is it going to be able to get the Ice Beam off on Salamence, or is it going to be forced to Rest Loop? That is anybody's guess. But, yeah, I mean, this particular mixed Ments, especially the one with Flamethrower, is really, really consistent into this particular team. So, if Mom's Dump Truck is something of a nightmare matchup for you, that's your ladder demon, and you're needing to get the win on Mom's Dump Truck to get to 1500, to get to 1550 or 1600, I would recommend maybe you try a mixed Ments, maybe one with Flamethrower over Fire Blast, so it could be something there. Next game is against Super Big Mario Fan 1. That's going to get a Wahoo from me. That was not a good one. Jim does it a lot better than I do. Alright, lead Skarm versus Hariyama. This is the best knockoff you can get in the format. I mean, we could argue about whether it's better to get it on Swampert or whatever. And then I go for counter on turn 2 to just massacre that Skarmory. Moltres is going to come in, and I'm not afraid of Moltres at all. Flamethrower is going to do peanuts as I go for Rock Slide, and that just kills. And my opponent forfeits the game. So, yeah. I mean, what can you really say about that? I mean, that's arguably an even better start than the previous game. And that was a really good start in that game, I'll be honest with you. So, yeah. Nothing else to say about that. I think that both Thick Fat and Guts were great into that Moltres turn there. If they go for Will-O-Wisp and I'm Guts, well, then that's not going to help you. And if they go for Flamethrower and I'm Thick Fat, then, well, I'm just eating that up. And then I'm going to pass a wish to Hariyama later in the game, most likely, and Hariyama's just going to be a nightmare for you. So, yeah, my opponent is going to forfeit there. Now we're up against no C420. I'm going to go for a Brick Break into the Tyranitar. This is probably the play that you should make if you're lead Tyranitar against a Hariyama. Switch to a flying type like Zapdos if you have one. I'm not saying that it's always going to end up great for you, but like, are you going to risk your entire Tyranitar on turn 1 just so that Hariyama is not able to get a knockoff on a different Pokemon? And then, like, conversely, like, say you stay in with the Tyranitar and you do no meaningful type of damage to the Hariyama, right? And they knock off your Tyranitar. What stops them from going for knockoff again as you switch, right? Like, that staying in with the Tyranitar to me is doing one of two things. It's either losing your Tyranitar or threatening that you're going to get knocked off twice. And if you get knocked off twice, as Jimothy Cool says, that's Christmas morning. So, see if we can get Christmas morning in this game. It should be a ladder challenge, get 3 knockoffs in one game. Call it Christmas morning after our buddy Jimothy Cool here. I'm going to go for Ice Beam into the Zapdos, which has no leftovers. We're going to find a Skarmory for our troubles. Not the worst Pokemon to get an Ice Beam on. We want to get the chip on Skarmory for sure. I'm going to Fire Blast with my Salamence. I guess in this particular replay, I opted for Fire Blast over Flamethrower. But anticipating a switch, I go for a Dragon Claw and I hit a Gengar, which is really, really nice. I could stay in, but I don't want to risk getting Ice Punched, and very nice by me to not get Ice Punched there. And then I'm going to switch to Skarmory on what might have been an Explosion turn, and I managed to get that right. So really nice. There is a possibility that this could have been a Wisp, Taunt, Gengar, and if it went for Wisp or Taunt into my Skarmory, that could have been not nice. But given how low the Gengar was at that point, I kind of figured that it would be okay to take a Wisp on Skarmory. I could always come back in with the Blissey at some point and Aromatherapy it off, especially if we're up against this Zapdos. So, an acceptable risk, and I don't think that Gengar would even want to stay in if it was Wisp Taunt to begin with, because it's so low, and if I go for Ice Beam, then basically Gengar's dead to the next attack, period. Possibly even dead to the Ice Beam after Sand. Probably not, though, because I think that probably does like 25 to a defensive Gengar. So, yeah. Really nice switch to Skarmory there. I'm tooting my own horn. I'm going to go to Claydol, who... The reason why I prefer Claydol over Blissey against this Zapdos is that Blissey's going to have to step on a spike, and it's going to take a Thunderbolt, which if I get crit, then I'm in really big trouble. Whereas Claydol is fine, and if I lose Claydol, like, not great, but not the end of the world, and it's not like Zapdos has any move that can one-shot Claydol anyway. I get roared into Vaporeon, which is not great. I will have to go back to Claydol. And then I can threaten to spin here. The spin blocker's gone. I do have a plus Spadef nature, so that Zapdos' hidden power is not going to get me. Now I can go to Blissey, who should be able to usually survive Thunderbolt. That does a lot. Couldn't have went for a crit there, but if they didn't get it, Soft-Boiled for my Blissey basically kind of just seals this game. So... their Blissey has Toxic, which is a little bit annoying. I'm going to have to switch my Blissey or use an Aromatherapy. Let's see what I opt to do. I managed to just stay in and Seismic Toss. I don't think anything else on my team is status, so it's not really that worth it for me to go for Aromatherapy. We'll just steal some PP from this Blissey here. This team is a little bit slower paced than your average team. I'm not saying it's like a stall per se, but sometimes you will just want to make plays to run your opponent out of some moves. I get a knockoff on Blissey, which is fantastic. I get Toxic here, and I do remember in this game that I am Guts, so this switch to Zapdos, and if I landed the Rock Slide, Zapdos was dead, even if it was a defensive Zapdos. So That's unfortunate. This is maybe a reason why you might want to run HP Rock, although HP Rock is going to be just generally not as good in the damage department against Zapdos, so yeah, what can you do? Blissey's going to soft boil up. And we're going to switch to Skarmory. Now I can get my spikes on the field. That's going to make it hard for this Blissey, particularly this Blissey that has no leftovers, and Tyranitar to get into the game. And most likely the last Mon is going to be Swampert. It's possible Aerodactyl as well. Could be an El Clasico team. But given the Gengar set, I'm not as inclined to think that is El Clasico that we're watching. I get Toxic on my Blissey. I'm gonna Seismic Toss. Yeah. I mean, having Toxic on Blissey kind of frees you up from not having to run Mono Pert, so something to know. I go for Aromatherapy there so that I can cure the poison from my Hariyama, and then I will come back in on a Toxic, which is fine. Now I'm threatening that Rock Slide again, but in this case I'm going to go for Brick Break, and I get a critical hit on the Skarm, which does a lot of damage. I will go for Knock Off, get rid of that item, and so I managed to do it. It's Christmas morning, I got 3 knockoffs. But yeah, now I'm getting roared out into my Hariyama here, who's Toxic, really low on HP. It's going to be really hard for me to get my Hariyama back into this game. I could maybe try to Wish it, but I would have to get rid of these hazards. I'd have to get rid of the Toxic first before I can even attempt to Wish to it. That Skarmory is really low. It has no leftovers. It's not really going to be able to get back into this game because of this Blissey set here. I doubt that it has Heal Bell, and the last Pokemon would have to have... Or sorry, I doubt that it has Wish. The last Pokemon would have to have Wish to even hope to get Skarmory back into this game. So I'm just gonna assume that it's not getting back in. Ice Beam into Zapdos there would have done a lot of damage if they stay in, but if not, I could maybe get a freeze on Blissey, force that to switch out, and then we're really in the driver's seat. But alas, the RNG does not work out that way, so we're gonna have to play a little bit more of a long game here. I go to Claydol, anticipating this Blissey to want to go for Soft Boiled, because, I mean, why wouldn't you, with a 50% HP Blissey? But they managed to call me out and go for the Ice Beam, which is not nice. I am going to opt to take the spin anyway, which does forfeit the Claydol, which is not that nice, but, I still have... Oh, actually, I don't think I knocked off leftovers on Zapdos. Somebody in the comments has already corrected me on that, I'm sure. But you know what? That's a comment for the engagement, so I'm not mad about it. Blissey's still going to be fine into the Zapdos. This Skarmory is dead to any real hit, so I'm not that worried about Skarmory getting spikes back up. And now this Blissey is in Brick Break range from my Mixed Ments, so I will just take the kill there. My opponent can't really switch that Blissey out because then you're coming back in on spikes and you're taking sand damage that you're not healing off because you don't have leftovers anymore, so it's kind of cooked for you. I'll just go for Ice Beam. I'm going to get a freeze eventually. And I'll go for Ice Beam again. That stops the Skarm from being able to come back in, so no spikes for my opponent. Arguably, I could have saved my Claydol. I don't think I had to make the play that I did against the Blissey, but I don't know. I guess I was just not wanting to play a super long game. I get crit by the +1 Tyranitar, which is crazy, because that's not my Lodic, that's Vaporeon. Vaporeon's not a Hax Magnet the same way. But I managed to cycle and Intimidate, then I go to Skarmory, and then I get the Roar off, which is really nice for me. Not the worst thing in the world if I don't get the Roar there. The Roar is really just to cover a second Dragon Dance. But the idea being that if that Tyranitar did get another Dragon Dance, then I would be able to come in with my Salamence, and a -1 Tyranitar is not going to kill me. Now this neutral speed or neutral attack +1 speed Tyranitar is going to be pretty threatening. But I managed to break through that flinch and get the Brick Break. I'm pretty sure that my Salamence is EV'd to always live a Jolly Tyranitar at neutral neutral Rock Slide. Reason being is that it can be really helpful to come in with the Salamence and get that Brick Break off to finish off Tyranitar. But we will die to the sand damage, and now it's my last Mon Blissey versus Swampert and Zapdos. So if Zapdos had Toxic there, this could have been a little bit dicey, but I do have Aromatherapy on Blissey, so it wouldn't have been game ending. Now Swampert will come in. It's pretty low, but if it has Earthquake, then I could be in trouble. I go for Soft Boiled. I managed to not get full parried there. If I got full parried there, I lost. But now I'm going to go for Aromatherapy so that I don't have to risk getting full parried. And I should be faster than Swampert now, which is really nice. Now Swampert's going for Ice Beam. My opponent sort of realizes that their only out here is to get an Ice Beam freeze, and then Blissey stays frozen long enough that it can Earthquake me down. I am going to go for my own Ice Beams, and because I'm faster, I'm like slightly more likely for my Ice Beam freeze to proc before my opponent's. It's not like super duper consequential, but might happen. I don't even really need a freeze to win the game. I just need my opponent to stay low. My opponent will go for a Protect there as I go for another Ice Beam. I can just go for Ice Beam again here, and I do manage to get the freeze. Not that it really mattered. It did stop my opponent from having an opportunity to get a freeze on me, though. So that's maybe relevant, and I managed to win that game. So, you know, in all honesty, I probably should have kept that Claydol. It would have been a little bit nicer to have versus the Tyranitar. I could have at least stuck some Earthquake damage onto it, but in any case, we're moving on. And Zeds, you better not say something about me saying in any case. I just want to say it and not have to think about it. You make me so self-conscious every time you point it out. We're up against Star Memes 888, and I remember playing this game because I was also playing a game called Peak with my friends. And I was dead, so I was like, alright, I'm going to queue a ladder game while I'm waiting for my friends to revive me. And this was more stressful than playing freaking Peak was. If you don't know what that game is, you should check it out. It's on Steam. I don't get paid any money for you checking it out, so just saying it for the sake of saying it. Lead Wheezing and then a Smeargle. That is like very strange. I'm gonna go to Claydol to Sleep Sacket, and then to Mence to cycle and Intimidate as this Smeargle goes for Dragon Dance. So I'm anticipating this to be some sort of nasty speed pass team with like Hariyama or what's his name? Marowak on it. But instead it's a Flareon passing the speed boost to Jirachi. I go to Blissey, and oh my god, that was a dynamic punch. I was like, it's so strange to want to pass like a Dragon Dance to potentially Jirachi, right? Like, Jirachi's not going to use any physical attacks, but that dynamic punch, oh my god. I do dodge it. I will go to Salamence to cycle and Intimidate as Jirachi goes for Fire Punch. I don't get burned, which is kind of nice. And then I stay in with my Mence because I'm like, okay, this has got to be some like physical Rachi, so it doesn't have Ice Punch. And it does have Ice Punch, so that was really dumb of me. I should have watched Z Panther's video on mixed Jirachi, and maybe I wouldn't have been so confused by that. So, Vaporeon is in. It's going to take an HP Grass for admittedly not that much damage, as I can just stick some Surf damage to the Rachi. I'm going to Surf again. No, actually I'm going to Wish. as Smeargle comes in and gets its Dragon Dance off versus my Vaporeon. Had I went for Surf again, then that Smeargle would not have been able to do that. But whatever. I'm going to have to Roar now as we reveal a Heracross who Brick Breaks for a pretty decent chunk. Not too much though. I will live this Mega Horn, thankfully. And then I'm going to pass the Wish to Skarmory, because Skarmory's the only thing on my team that's really going to threaten this Heracross out. Staying in with Vaporeon. I guess I could have kept my Wish, but I felt like I could keep the Wish anyway. There's some kind of passive Pokemon on this team. I managed to dodge the Wisp for the ability to get my third layer up, which is really nice. And then I can just stay in with Claydol versus Weezing. And then it goes for Boom. Oh well, no more Claydol, but no more Weezing, so that's not the worst. Flareon is in. I'm not sure what it wants to do. I guess Double Edge is the play. 130 physical attack stat from that Flareon, so not too bad. But I am going to get Spored, because I don't have my Sleep Sack anymore. Now I'm going to have to go to Vaporeon on this Smeargle going for Dragon Dance. And I think I go for Surf. Very good. I've watched enough Null Speed Pass to know you should just attack against the Smeargle because you don't want to get taunted. A consideration for me was to go for Wish, but because I revealed Roar, I thought it was extremely likely that my opponent would want to taunt me. So we're going to go to Skarmory, who does have Drill Peck, so we can manage to get through that Heracross. And now this is not looking so terrible for me. I will Protect to waste a Dynamic Punch off this Jirachi. And now a consideration for me is to run this Jirachi completely out of Dynamic Punches. I go to Vaporeon, hoping to get a Wish off because I would survive a Hidden Power Grass. But unfortunately I get burned. I am going to risk the Blissey taking a Dynamic Punch to go for Aromatherapy and then switch to Skarmory, who dodges another Dynamic Punch. Very nice. I will go for Protect, as my opponent goes for Fire Punch this time, which is great. Then goes for Hidden Power Grass, anticipating me to switch to Vaporeon, as I astutely go for a Roar. I get Rock Slided by this Metagross. I don't know what exactly Metagross it is. It could be Bulky Attacker or it could be Agility. Agility would maybe make some sense, but I'm just going to Roar Spam to try to get this Metagross and Jirachi both down in HP. It's going to cost me my whole Skarmory, but I'm going to take a Fat Meteor Mash from that Metagross and counter, which will kill it. So that's really nice. That's where counter can be helpful in the end game. I'm going to sack the Hariyama to the Jirachi here. I go to Vaporeon, who's no longer burned, thankfully for us. Go for Protect, get some HP back on the Vaporeon, and then I'm going to switch hard to Blissey, as they call it, and go for Dynamic Punch. And they go for another Dynamic Punch and miss. So I'm getting really lucky with these Dynamic Punch misses. It does manage to land and gets a critical hit, but I don't hit myself in confusion at the very least, which is nice. And then I'm going to go to Vaporeon as I get hit with an HP Grass. Very, very not cool. I am going to sack the Vaporeon here, and now I'm playing all in on them missing this last Dynamic Punch. And they do. So I can soft boil the up, and now my Blissey should just win. Oh my god, what a game. I probably played that really, really badly and got bailed out by the RNG. But, you know, that's what happens when you use Dynamic Punch Jirachi. You miss a lot of punches that you need to hit, and then you lose. Although that crit did, that did matter. In a sense, if I did not get crit there, then there was a possibility that I could have done some different plays and Blissey was more likely to survive. Because I just would have had to dodge, I think, the remaining 2 Dynamic Punches and not get crit by either of them. So, like, not the best odds for my opponent, even if they had landed an additional one, but only if they didn't get the crit. That crit really, like, made it a legitimate 50-50 right there. But, you know, sometimes you're just lucky and you win. So, really cool game. I'm glad that I got to show that, because that was a crazy game and really badly played by me. But that Hariyama did get that kill on Metaverse though, so that was nice. That's going to do it for this video though. I hope all of you Hariyama enjoyers have been satisfied by this video, and if not, well, Hariyama is a Pokemon that is usable on a few different teams, and it's paired with some not so common Pokemon, so this may not be the last time we will see Hariyama. Not probably the last time I'm doing a Hariyama video, though, specifically. So, really soak it in while you can. This has been Tetrafolium. I hope you will watch some of my next videos as they come out, so we'll see you guys then.